Welcome back to Family Twist. I'm Corey, and today we've got something really special for you. Kendall was so excited to dive into today's conversation that he completely forgot to introduce our guest and just started talking. But trust me, you're in for a treat because today, Kendall is chatting with writer, advocate, and fellow adoptee Rich Erlob in the first of a two-part episode. Rich is the heart behind a new musical called For the Records, which tells the powerful and emotional story of adoption during the baby scoop era. This was a time when adoption often meant secrecy and shame, and adoptees grew up with limited access to their roots and identities. The musical is set in 1967 and follows a teenage couple facing an unexpected pregnancy, an infertile couple hoping to adopt, and a child separated from their roots, all against the backdrop of a society that wasn't ready to talk about adoption openly. Rich himself is an adoptee and a longtime advocate, serving as president of the Coalition for Truth and Transparency in Adoption and Denver's Adoption Search Resource Connection. His work has led to major legislative changes in Colorado, bringing greater transparency and support to adoptees and birth families. So let's jump right into this incredible discussion. No formal intros needed.
There was an open mic where I played one of the songs, and that kind of helped launch the idea of doing the whole staged reading, which was illuminating, and I was so happy that it resonated with people.
I've written things that never saw the light of day, but I've never been at that point. I can only imagine how exciting that is.
The whole thing really started in COVID during the pandemic when I was sitting outside in the hot tub and got a download of about 15 songs in my head. And I thought, well, that would make an incredible musical, and I'm 100% certain I am not the person to do it.
Oh, that's fun. Well, I applaud you. I started because Corey told me that he met you. Even before I knew that we would be talking tonight, I went to your website and started listening to the music, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I mean, I'm a musical fan anyway, so I was an easy sell, but I think a lot of people would really appreciate the content and quality.
Thank you so much. And there's a saying that says that the best friend of every songwriter is a great arranger. And I was really fortunate to find an outstanding arranger. I would consider myself more a lyricist / book writer. And I grew up playing the piano, and so I have good musical sensibilities, but I'm not, I'm composing, I would say, is my weakest suit.
It's difficult. I mean, I think all things are difficult. I think lyricism itself is difficult, but I mean, just knowing which, instruments to put together and at the right times, and it's amazing to me. I find that fascinating, and I have about this much talent when it comes to that. So
I'm curious, what kind of things have you written? I always enjoy meeting people who write.
Yeah, well, I mean, short stories and things like that. It's funny, Corey and I are starting to work on a screenplay for something, whether it turns out to be a play about my adoption discovery story, or I don't know. I mean, I guess the sky's the limit. We don't think of it like that sometimes. Like, you think, oh, this could be a fun documentary, but that's it's easy to say and hard to do, right? So, and my story's still unfolding. Yours probably. I saw you found your family in 1995, and I assume that it's still unfolding some level.
It's pretty static at this point. When I found them all, 2 of my biological aunts were still alive, and they've since passed. The relationships with siblings and cousins have kind of faded after the big surprise and the aha. And so it's kind of like we all know who each other are, and we know where each other are, and everyone is living their lives, not communicating much. So sometimes that's just how it unfolds.
Absolutely. I feel like I ended up with 6 half siblings, 3 on my dad's side and 3 on my mom's side. And I'm close with 3 of them, and 3 of them, I mean, we're fine together, but it's just, there isn't that connectedness that I thought would be there. And I often say on this podcast how delusional I was about the way that things would go. Part of that's because I'm an optimist by nature, but part of it's also that I'm a complete control freak. And so I thought that I would fix everything. I have that savior complex too, where, okay, I got this. Everybody sit down. I'm going to handle everything. And A, that doesn't work for a lot of people. And B, it isn't that simple, right? It's just not that simple. I'm still learning every day. It's been a humbling experience, very humbling, because I don't know. Go ahead.
How many years are you into your process?
I found them all in 2017. So we're getting close to 7 years. And I'm going to go ahead and say the word resentment. My resentment is toward my biological mother because she's never spoken to me. I guess she can't handle it, whatever. I listened to that for the first almost 4 years. I kept listening to my sisters saying, oh, she wants to meet you someday. And I'm like, time is passing. Something could happen to either of us. This is ridiculous. And it still hasn't happened. And I've been more and more vocal about how I feel about that and how excluded I feel, because, for instance, my youngest sister, my mother's daughter, lives physically next door to my mother. And rightfully so, 2 of my sister's 3 children recently got married. And of course, I'm not going to be invited because I don't speak to my mother. Do you know what I mean? It's just, and I resent being excluded from all of those things. Like, forget my mother. I know my niece who just got married. I think she would have enjoyed it had I been there. But of course, I'm excluded by default. And you don't know me, but I'm a very proud person. And I'm like, well, screw you. I deserve to be there. And how dare you? That's just who I am.
Yeah, you're still a second tier relative.
Exactly.
If push comes to shove and we have to choose between offending mom and offending our newfound brother, well, yeah.
And at some fundamental level, I get it. Of course, my niece wants her grandmother to be at the wedding. Of course she does. It's just, can't hurt. You can't help but get your feelings hurt. You just can't.
Well, and I think it's highlight the betwixt and between place that adoptees live even after you've found your truth. And family culture is an interesting thing because some families are just warm and welcoming and, oh my God, the baby's back. This is the best thing ever. And others are just so lost in their shame or being upset about not being the oldest anymore or things like that. That kind of happened in my situation. That I was like, you can be the oldest. Go ahead. I don't really care. If that's important to you, you be the oldest.
Yeah. And it's funny because I often talk about the dichotomy because my biological father's family has been so accepting and so warm. And I felt so accepted by them immediately, and in fact, it was those early connections. So Corey and I found them all, my dad's side, in August of 2017. And we were living in San Francisco and we flew out to meet my father and 2 of his other 3 children here in New England. And on the plane ride back home, Corey looked over at me and said, we're moving there. It was just this epiphany. He's like, you've missed 47 years with these people. You're not missing any, because he already felt that warmth from them. And by January, we were here. It was crazy how we just kind of dropped everything and said, yeah, okay, let's do it, which is kind of the way we haven't done it often, but we did the same thing when we moved from St. Louis to San Francisco. It literally happened over the course of 2 months between the, hey, let's do it. And, I showed up with 2 pieces of luggage and said, I guess I live here now. I'm like, it's just comical, but we're not afraid of those things. And it has been wonderful. I mean, to be so near my family, getting to know them, my brother's son just graduated high school, like physically being here for these moments is so wonderful for me. So did you grow up with other siblings in your adoptive family?
Yeah, I had an older sister who was adopted before me, and I came along 2 years later, and then unexpectedly they had their own biological child, a younger sister, because they thought they could not have kids. And I guess statistically that doesn't happen that often, but I run across a remarkable number of stories where that does happen.
Well, that's amazing. Now, did you always know you were adopted? I don't know your story. I mean,
Yeah, it was. There's kind of two versions of being adopted. There's we loved you, we chose you, we wanted you adopted, and then there's the mom's not your real mom adopted. Or and so I started with the more positive one from my parents, and I think that's what implants in a lot of adoptees' minds. And I had it, this vision of them with the shopping cart going to the baby store and up and down the aisles and going, well, we picked this one, as opposed to I was matched. It wasn't that they chose me; I was who they were given, and I'm thankful. The good suburban Leave It to Beaver family who did everything they knew how to do to raise us and give us a good home, and um, my parents stayed together, and my dad had a stable job, and my mom was able to be a housewife. So it really was kind of a Leave It to Beaver life in many ways. But then when I was 5, my older adopted sister was mad at me one day, and she started saying, mom's not your real mom, which was sort of ironic and hypocritical because mom wasn't her real mom either. Kids can be mean. And so that really threw my little 5-year-old brain into a twist, which I like the name of your podcast, the family twist thing. And it took, I was devastated. It was weeks. I was moping around saying, I wish I knew who my real mother was. And my adopted mom finally got tired of hearing it. And I don't think she really knew what to do. But she finally just said, I'm your real mother. She was your first mother. We're not going to talk about this anymore. And that was that.
Did she know biological mother was?
No, it was a closed adoption, but they did receive records that had my birth name on them,
Wow.
which they withheld from me for 30 years.
Yeah. I'm not judging your parent. I am just so angry when I hear those things. Like, you deserve to know, it's just, and my parents didn't do that. So I feel really fortunate that I've always known my biological name was Scott White. I assumed that somebody had opened a phone book and just pointed at a name because it sounded so generic. But the reality was my birth mother's last name was White, and my father's first name, well, he went by Scott. It was his middle name, but it did make sense why she named me that. But it sounded so generic that I thought it was a joke. But yeah, I'm fortunate because when you had those two analogies, I was definitely the first one, where my parents, said, truthfully, they had no idea, because mine also was closed adoption. They had no idea the circumstances of my birth. And I, as either an older toddler or like a 4-year-old, I would say things like, well, what do you think? Do you think my parents were just too young? Well, what do you think? Did they die? What do you think? My mother also got tired of my line of questioning and said, Kendall, can we just move on? Well, you're here. And a creepy thing that I thought that relates to the story you just told, they actually showed when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12, my father showed me the creepy little book of photographs of infant they did get to choose from. And I'm like, that's gross and weird. And they thought so too. They were like, please take this away from us. And my mother said, this one would do if you had to, you know what I mean? And they actually did get to choose me, but I think they got bad karma with that because I was a very sick baby. So, it is what it is. But uh, I'm fortunate because during the course of the conversations Corey and I have had with people on this podcast, I've heard so many stories of, adoptees who have had such bad experiences where they just have felt lied to for so long. And I am thankful to say I did not, have that experience, but I have empathy.
Well, the hard thing is, as hard as that lands with us, I really believe most of it was not malicious. It was just the way things were. It was the culture of the day. It was the psychology of the day. It was the belief system of the day that if you don't make it an issue, it's not going to be an issue for the kid. Here's your little blank slate. And that kind of comes out in the musical of these were the times. And one of the lines the main character Joshua says is, well, that must be why they don't want to talk about it. They think there's nothing to talk about. And in that baby scoop era, last half of the 20th century, and a lot of them just didn't have the tools either. These are people coming out of World War II and Korea and people who grew up in the Depression. And the sense of we show our love by our actions, and we're giving you a home and 3 square meals a day, and you're having birthday parties, and we come in and kiss you goodnight and say your prayers. That's what parents do. And we're checking all the boxes. So if there's a problem, it's your problem.
Yep. No, and I think you're exactly right. I actually applaud you for giving credence to the fact it was a different era and expectations were different. And I think that gives us some grace toward our parents or by our adoptive parent, and I think that's important because I hear a lot of, I'm not judging the criticism, but I hear a lot of harsh criticism of parents from that era. And to your point, my adoptive parents were born in 1933 and 34. So my dad and my mother, they were providers. That was their goal in life, and it was a mindset, and I benefited from it, but they also happen to be a little bit more enlightened than a lot of people were from that era. So, I remember asking my dad when I was like little kid, like 5 or something, because he would talk about his heritage, right? His ethnic here, he was a American Indian, and he physically looked like it. And I so didn't look like he did that, he was always saying, well, you're part of my family. So let's talk about, and we would get into these discussions about the Cherokee Nation and all these cool things. But at the end of it, I'd say, that's really great for you. I'm just sitting over here, not really identifying with your story. Same thing with my mother. We knew a lot about her family's background and stuff. And I wanted that biological connection. And I don't know, just must be innate because it happened so early for me to question, I loved being part of their family and I felt very accepted, but I just didn't always fit in,
Well, when I've testified before legislative committees, often early in my testimony, I will put forth the idea that life's 3 biggest questions are: where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? Excuse me. And if you don't have the answer to question number 1, it makes questions 2 and 3 a lot more difficult. And people have phrased it in terms of, starting with chapter 2 instead of chapter 1. And all those things are true. Every major world religion has some sort of ancestor worship or tribal affiliation that's important. And another thing I've said in committees is, genealogy has historically been the number 2 hobby behind gardening in America, if you don't count, video games, I guess.
Right.
And if that's the case, why is that normal for everybody except adopted people? Why are we somehow ungrateful or implying that we weren't loved properly or that kind of thing by wanting to know this really primal answer?
Yeah.
And one of our goals has been to just normalize that. And then it's easy to follow up and say, so given that, if you decided you wanted to search for your genealogy, what if somebody said, well, you've got to get a court order and or hire an intermediary for $750 to go get you permission for people to even know your name or for you to know their name? And then the lights start to come on with legislators and other people and say, I had not thought about it that way. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Doesn't affect them the same way that it does us. And, recently I accidentally started a family squabble in my mother's family. And my sister said something like, well, our mother feels like her rights were violated because you found her. And I said, well, I petitioned the court twice and got 0 movement, nothing. They did their job. I only found the family through DNA. So try to find another reasonable discussion, because this is not working for me. That is completely false. And, I don't know if my mother's just ignorant or I don't know. It was comical to me. I was like, that has nothing to, in fact, I begged, my family attorney had become a prominent judge in my county where I grew up. And when I had lost both my adoptive parents by the time I was 17, and they died young. And when I turned 18, I went straight to Graham Partlow's office and said, hey, I know you know every detail about me, but he did exactly what he should have done and stuck to the letter of the law and said, Kendall, I love you. He'd hung out with me my whole life. He said, I'm not going to get disbarred for this. And, please try other avenues, and I did, but it never was fruitful until the ancestry test. So.
What state was this that you were adopted
Arkansas. And, it was closed. And my parents went into that knowing it. It's funny because when I was a child, I thought that maybe they preferred that. They didn't. They were very, they would have been open to an open adoption had it really been a possibility. It just really, well, A, it wasn't legal, but B, it just really wasn't done much, as much as they didn't think it was done very often back then. So for them, it would have been an anomaly.
Well, in most states, in almost all states, there has always been a provision in law where a judge can make a finding of good cause to open the records. And so as a judge, I don't think he would have been disbarred. It would have been unusual. When I got my records here, the clerk at the Denver Juvenile Court, who has long since retired, was almost incensed. She was like, well, how did you get this order? No, you're only the 3rd person in the state that's ever happened to. How did you get this? And she called over to the court to see if that was really for real. And she demanded to see the seal on the papers, like they were her records. Or she had some personal investment in me not getting them. And it was, at the time, incredibly offensive. I mean, now it's kind of comical. I'm like, really? What horrible thing do you think is going to happen by me knowing where I came from?
Exactly. And the older I get, I have no tolerance for it. It's like, this is our right to know, I don't know. It's unfathomable to me that people, would still think that we should just, brush it under the rug and move on. Like, well, if that were you, what would you, like you said to the legislators?
Thanks for listening to Family Twist. I hope you enjoyed this candid conversation with Richard. I think Kendall's excitement to dive right in just shows how much passion there is around these stories. Rich's journey from adoptee to advocate, and now to creator of the record, is nothing short of inspiring. His musical, based on the real-life experiences of adoptees and birth families, highlights the powerful need for identity, truth, and healing in the adoption journey. And this is only part one, so make sure to tune in next time as Kendall and Rich go even deeper into these themes and share more of their personal stories. Until then, take care, and remember that every family twist has a story worth telling. The Family Twist Podcast, presented by Warfare Marketing Communications and produced by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, and features original music by Cosmic Afterthoughts.